I wanted to explain action learning by telling you a story. Quite a few years ago now, I was presenting a workshop at an OD conference in Budapest. And I had never been there before, and it was a really big conference. And they had a bunch of social activities that they set up in the evenings for participants to join to get to know each other. And one of the activities was a bike tour, of a nighttime bike tour of Budapest, even really cool, actually. And having not been there before, I thought, oh, I'm going to go on that. So I signed up for this bike tour and I went along, and it was at this bike shop, and it was like a shop, and then there was like a parking lot next to the bike shop. And we went in and we got kitted up with a helmet and a bike. And then we were waiting for everybody else outside in this parking lot. And while we were waiting, a woman came out with her bike and her helmet. We were kind of cycling around this empty parking lot while we were waiting. And she gets on her bike and she went like 2 feet and fell over. And of course, everybody else was like, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? And she gets up. Yep, yep, I'm fine. She gets up and she got back on her bike and literally did exactly the same thing again, like fell over again. And so this drew quite a lot of attention. And we were like, are you really okay? And she said, yeah, I'm fine, but this is a lot harder than I thought. And I promise you, this is a true story. And we were like, kind of asking her questions about it. And it turns out that she had never ridden a bike. She had literally read about riding a bike and thought that she could ride a bike. And she ended up, one of the people who were taking us on the tour ended up staying back and giving her bicycle riding lessons. And she did that while the rest of us did our bike tour of Budapest. And kind of the moral of the story, and the reason it relates to action learning is all about learning through action. It's really hard to learn properly through theory, but the way we really learn is by acting, reflecting on that action, learning, and then taking an additional action. That action learning cycle is really important. And that's what action learning is all about. It is a process where we get a balance between working on real and urgent problems and taking action. So working on real and problem and taking action and also learning at the same time. So it's a process of questioning and active listening, where a small group works on real problems and takes action. And it's a management tool that helps develop leaders and teams and organizations simultaneously. So our team has been working with action learning for 10 years together. I was trained in action learning about almost 15 years ago now. And we learned this from the person who's considered to be kind of the father of the method that we use, Mike Marquardt, who's a professor in the US and has developed the method that we'll be using in our work. The concept of action learning there are a lot of different versions of it, and they all stem from a guy named Reg Revens, who basically was a Cambridge scholar, Cambridge University scholar. He was a scientist. And when he was at Cambridge, he used to go to tea time in England. You kind of stop in the middle of the afternoon and have cup of tea. And they'd sit around a table and they would ask each other questions about their research. And he learned from that people who did not have a lot of subject matter expertise could add value through asking questions. He was influenced by the work of a mentor of his, Albert Einstein. So you see, we have 3 degrees of separation from Albert Einstein, which is kind of cool. And Albert Einstein, amongst his many quotes, had this quote, which is really relevant to action learning, which he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I can solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. So we don't spend 55 minutes out of an hour on the problem, but we will be spending time making sure we have agreement on the problem. And I encourage you all to trust the process and know that that's an effective way of problem solving, and it means that you get to action a lot quicker, just like Albert Einstein explains here. Right. There are 6 components to action learning. And the diverse perspectives add value because just like Reg Revans's T table, the different perspectives mean that people bring questions coming from different backgrounds and experiences, and that means that you can get to better breakthrough solutions. So that process of reflective questioning and listening is super important. There is a balance, as I said, between developing strategies, taking action, and a commitment to learning. And we will be helping to make sure that that balance is maintained and that you get the most possible from your time together. So those are the 6 components. Now, these still look familiar. I hope so, to all of you. Part of action learning, at the start of the action learning, we're going to be asking you to state a leadership skill that you want to work on. We encourage you to pick something that maybe doesn't come so naturally. We have one main ground rule and then a second one that I'm going to mention. So the main ground rule is statements can only be made in response to a question. All right, that's really important ground rule. Statements can only be made in response to a question. Anyone can ask a question of anyone else at any time, but a statement can only be made in response to a question. And the action learning coach is there, and we have the authority to intervene to promote learning and also improve the performance of the group. That's it. No other ground rules. So any other ground rules are set by you guys if you want any other ground rules. There are a bunch of reasons why we use questions. I just will talk about just a few. Questions help us be more creative because of that diversity that we all bring through the perspectives that we have, and can help us lead to better breakthrough ideas. They help us engage people. And so it's a really great opportunity in action learning to practice your questioning, because when you use questioning in your leadership, it demonstrates engagement and interest, helps us build relationships. It can allow us the time and space we need to step back and reflect. And it allows us to broaden our thinking and consider multiple options before we converge towards solutions. We're all paid to get to solutions. Solutions are great, but we have a bias to jumping to solutions because that's what society trains us to do. This process encourages us to step back from that and think about questions before we go to solutions. It won't feel that natural to you, but you'll see how you feel about it once we practice it. The way questioning usually happens in problem solving, ideally, is you start by diverging, asking open questions that are less judgment, imaginative, all about quantity, not about quality. And then as you start getting agreement on where you're trying to go, you converge to more closed questions. Yeah? And this process can happen multiple times, open, close, through the problem solving process. It's usually associated with this progression. So ideally, we start with a problem, which is what's going on today. And we move toward the goal, which is what we want in the future. And then we go to solutioning, which is the action plan. What often happens when you ask people what problems they have, they'll explain a goal. How do I do X? How do I increase my revenue stream? How do I make this better for the team? Whatever it is. And what we're trying to do is make sure that it's problem oriented. When we ask questions, there are a few things that can make your questions even more effective. So one is to only ask one question at a time. Your coach will probably step in if you ask multiple questions, We sometimes call them double-barreled questions. But what happens if you ask more than one question at a time is that people get lost and don't know what question they're trying to answer. So one question at a time, be as concise and precise as possible with your questions and your responses. And ask legitimate questions, i.e., especially at the beginning, try to keep them open, not ones like, have you tried X or have you thought about Y? Really try to keep them open and curious questions. And try not to close your own questions down and answer them yourself. What we often hear is people go, they ask this great open question, how might you blah, 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 blah. Could you, for example, do X, Y, or Z? Where you're answering your own question. So try not to do that. And then think about that diamond that I showed you. Like, when do you need to stay broad and when can you start narrowing?